This is the Louie T Network. Hey, either you're outside or you're
in the lab room.
Rex Ryan and John Idzik out. Todd Bowles and Mike Maccagnan in. Who else could it be but me, your man, Louie T? Welcome to this In the Lab Room special coaching search series. Today we're talking about the J-E-T-S, Jets, and their coaching search. And not only is it a coaching search, but it was also a GM search as well, as the Jets cleaned house, got rid of Rex Ryan and John Idzik. And so they were not only looking for a new head coach, they were also looking for a new general manager. And so you look at Rex Ryan, his situation, had 5 years in New York, and it was a tumultuous situation for him towards the end. He was able to save his job last season at the end with a win, and he played some good football down the stretch, went 8-8, finished up with the win against the Dolphins in Miami, wrecking the Dolphins season and in effect saving Ryan's job. Woody Johnson came down to the locker room and announced that Ryan would be back in front of the players. It was a great scene. I'm a huge Rex Ryan fan, so I enjoyed the fact that he was back for another chance. This season got off to a rough start. They got off to, I want to say it was 0-6 before they finally got on the board. Whatever it wasn't good enough for Rex Ryan. They finished up with a 4-12 campaign, and thus Rex Ryan was canned as Jets head coach. You also look at John Idzik. He came in as the general manager just a brief 2 seasons ago. He cleaned house, got rid of a lot of veterans on this football team. He came in and he was pounding the table talking about competition. But his failure to bring in talented football players, and my biggest problem with him as a general manager was the fact that last year's draft was so wide receiver rich. And for them to wait until the latter stages of the draft, I think they spent about 2 or 3 picks on 5th round receivers, 2 of which didn't even make the roster. They drafted 3 receivers last year. 2 of them were cut before training camp was over. So it just was a situation where you felt like the Jets needed to upgrade talent and they didn't do it as much as they should have. And so he was responsible for that. And I think the Jets really just wanted to go in a different direction. They didn't like what was going on, and they just wanted to start fresh, clean the slate, get a blank canvas, and just start anew. And the only way to do that is to get a new general manager and have that general manager help in the search of a head coach, and that's what the Jets effectively did. So you move on to where the Jets are now, and you look at their head coach, and the thing that Woody Johnson has done, and I really like Woody Johnson as an owner. I think he's loyal, and I think that's one of the biggest traits that you want to find in an owner these days is loyalty and patience. Those are the 2 things that go hand in hand. When you don't have that, normally it's a recipe for disaster in any walk of life, especially in ownership. And because of how this league works, it's a year-to-year league. It's a league where continuity and, you know, having a team that's been together for a number of years usually benefits you in the long run. And so when you look around the league, you look at the teams that are consistently winning in this league. Talk about the Ravens, you talk about the Green Bay Packers, you talk about the New England Patriots, you talk about the teams that get it done on a year-in, year-out basis, that's always talked about as one of the best teams, that's always hovering around the playoffs and the Super Bowl. These are teams with head coaches that have been around for a while. These are teams with front offices that are intact. These are teams that have players that have been in their organization for a while. They're stable. They don't have a lot of change and turnover. Those are the outfits that usually get it done in this league on a consistent basis. And Woody Johnson stuck with Rex Ryan for a while. He could have easily have gotten rid of Rex Ryan 2 years ago, even last year. But because of the success Rex had when he first got to New York, I think that was something that was able to give Rex Ryan an opportunity to keep his job because of the AFC Championship games, because they just felt like if we could just get this, if we can just get that, Rex can turn this thing around. It never really happened. It never materialized. But Woody Johnson was willing to stick it out and see what happened. And a lot of bad trades, a lot of bad things happened under the last general manager. Before Idzik got there, Idzik didn't really turn anything around, and so he was out. And now they're looking to just have football guys. I don't know necessarily if John Idzik was a strict football guy. And when you talk about football guys, we're talking about lifers, guys that have been around the game for their entire lives. They dedicate themselves to football. And when you look at your general manager now in Mike Maccagnan, and the funny thing about the Mike Maccagnan hire and the GM search in New York was Woody Johnson surrounded himself with people who were football guys. And he took a lot of advice from Charlie Casserly, who is the ex-Washington Redskins general manager, ex-Houston Texans general manager. And it's a good old boys league a lot of times, and where it's a fraternity. You hear that word all the time, coaches, general managers. It's a small fraternity, and everyone knows everyone just about. And if there's a tight-knit circle of guys that you know, you trust, you've worked with before, you know their work, you're familiar with them, and you're comfortable with them. And when you ask for help from someone, they're going to recommend guys that they know, that they're comfortable with, that they've worked with in the past. So when you look at this head coaching search, you look at this general manager search, I think Charlie Casserly has his fingerprints all over this search and these hires. You start with Mike Maccagnan, your new general manager, and he's a guy that worked closely with Charlie Casserly in Washington. He was a young scout, was Maccagnan, in those days when Casserly was the general manager in Washington. Maccagnan then moved on to the Texans with Casserly, who was the general manager for the Texans when they started up. Casserly was there. He brings Mike Maccagnan in to help him there as well, and that's where he had been the last couple of years since they have been in existence. And so Maccagnan had been with the Texans organization, and Casserly said, hey, this is a guy I know, this is a guy I trust, I know he's a football guy, he eats, breathes, sleeps, lives football, and this is the type of guy you want in your front office. He's not going to rest until he turns this thing into a winner. Now, he's never had this actual title, he's never been in this much control, never had this much power, so you don't know how he's going to do with the position, but you do know he has the credentials and has the mindset to do what is necessary to help turn this thing around, and he has the football acumen, he has the football IQ, he has an eye for talent, a long-time scout, so you expect him to do the one thing the Jets haven't done a great job of in the later rounds in the draft. See, Jets have done a pretty good job of identifying talent in the early rounds of the draft, which for me, with most teams, you don't have a problem there. The really good general managers, the really good evaluators of talent are the ones that can find hidden gems in the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th round. The undrafted rookie free agents. Those are where you set yourself apart. When you are able to find a diamond in the rough, that's when you're doing your job. It's easy to hit a home run in the 1st round or in the 2nd round or even in the 3rd round, because 3rd round picks are becoming hot commodities now. They're becoming more like 2nd round picks. You need your 3rd round picks, and you need to hit pretty good, hit a solid average in the 3rd round. Where you start to see teams drop off is in the 4th round, in the 5th round, and beyond. And so when you are a great evaluator of talent, when you understand what your team needs are and you understand what these players can bring to the table, that's when you start to see general managers and talent evaluators separate themselves from the pack in the later portion of the round, and even in undrafted rookie free agents. So you look at Maccagnan, and he's a guy that has been a scout for a very long time, understands what it's going to take to get talented football players into this Jets organization, and I think that's what was something that attracted him to Woody Johnson. And again, Woody Johnson taking advice from a guy like Charlie Casserly, who has worked very closely with Mike Maccagnan over the years. To me, that's where the connection is. Maccagnan going to be the next general manager of the New York Jets. Now you talk about the head coaching search, and once again, we go to this brotherhood here, this fraternity. And again, Maccagnan worked with Todd Bowles. Bowles was actually a player in Washington, and so the two crossed paths. I'm pretty sure that Maccagnan was there when Todd Bowles was there as a player, so they may have crossed paths, they may not have. I mean, it's kind of hard to say. You really don't know for sure, but again, both were in Washington at the same time. That may have been the first time they've crossed paths. Now, you talk to Charlie Casserly, he definitely knows about Todd Bowles. He was the one who drafted him into the National Football League. So again, you see where this is going. But Todd Bowles has his own legs to stand on. He's been in the National Football League his entire career, whether it's a player, whether it's a coach. He's been, a defensive backs coach. He himself was a defensive back in the National Football League. So he's been around the world and back in terms of, jobs around the league as a defensive backs coach, whether it's in Miami, whether it's in Dallas, whether it's in Cleveland, or he's had a cup of tea with this very Jets organization in 2000 as a secondaries coach. So he's been around the block there. He's had a defensive coordinator stint in Miami, and actually was a head coach for 2 weeks in Miami and had a 1-1 mark there. So he's got a little bit of experience, and I think that also played a hand in him getting this opportunity, having a little bit of coaching experience. So that did not hurt him, definitely. And so you look at his experience with the Eagles as a defensive coordinator, and then on to Arizona, where he really made his mark and gave himself a chance to become a head coach in this league. And the thing that I love about Todd Bowles and the hire here in New York is the fact that the defensive pressure is going to continue. That was his calling card in Arizona. No matter what it was in the first quarter, 3rd and 10 from, the 13-yard line, or it's the fourth quarter, last possession of the game, 4th and 7, Todd Bowles was bringing the kitchen sink. He was blitzing. That was his calling card. Live by the blitz, die by the blitz. And I love coordinators who stay true to themselves. If I've got to bring the house to get pressure, then that's what I will do. And so what he's going to remind me of in New York was, remember Rex's first couple of years, especially his first season in New York, where Rex was just blitzing out of control, and I loved it. It was probably one of the most exciting defenses to watch in the last 10 years or so, because they were blitzing. You knew any kind of long yardage situation, Rex was coming with 6, with 7, possibly even 8, depending on how many people you had out in the route. Rex was bringing the kitchen sink, and it was a lot of fun to watch in those days. And of course, you got to have guys that can cover to be able to do that. So we'll see if the Jets have the horses outside for him to run his scheme, because he had those guys in Arizona that could man up, especially in the secondary with the corners, and his safeties could cover as well. So he was able to devise blitzes and schemes to allow him to send 6, 7, 8 guys on any given play if necessary and have 0 coverage behind. So we'll see what he does. But one thing's for sure, the pressure will continue in New York. Now, how do I feel about the hire of Todd Bowles? I think that I am somewhat lukewarm. Now, I love the hire, okay? I love the hire of the coach himself. Now, what I am somewhat indifferent about is the type of coach that he is. He's a defensive coach. What does the Jets do well? They do defense well. So they're continuing on that tradition of doing everything defense. I think it was something like 6 or 7 consecutive years of drafting a first-round player on the defensive side of the football. Well, Todd Bowles is a defensive-minded coach. The problem in New York all these years was that the offense was never on the same page with the defense. The offense never quite caught up to what the defense was cooking up. And so I wanted to see someone come in with offensive pedigree, and I really wanted to see someone come in here that could turn the fortunes of this Jets offense around and find one hell of a defensive coordinator to come in here and keep this defense going. That's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see an offensive-minded head coach that could maybe get this Jets offense on track. Meanwhile, you bring in a defensive-minded, a defensive coordinator that has clout that could keep this defense afloat. But either way, you're getting a coach that's going to pay attention to the X's and O's. He's a good football guy. He's going to have this defense play legit football. My question still remains, what does that mean for the offense? And that's why I'm lukewarm about this hire. I love Todd Bowles. I love his philosophy. And I love what he brings to the table. I'm just not in love with the fact that I still have question marks about this Jets offense. Speaking of question marks about this Jets offense, let's talk about some of these assistant coaches that have been brought in along with Todd Bowles. You start with the defensive coordinator. He brings in Casey Rogers, and I talk about this being a fraternity and having guys that you know working under you. And when you get a first-time head coach, you get a first-time guy, he's looking to make his situation as comfortable as possible. He's going to find all of his friends, all of the guys that he trusts, and bring them in with him. And so usually when you see veteran coaches who've done this, they've got a team. They've got a team of guys that they've worked with in the past. And so when they get a job, those guys all have jobs. And so when you have a first-time head coach, he's assembling a cast of guys that he trusts. And so Casey Rogers, here's a guy that at numerous stops where Todd Bowles was the secondary coach, Casey Rogers was the defensive line coach. In Dallas, he was the same defensive line coach where you had Todd Bowles, the secondary coach in Dallas. In Miami, Casey Rogers, defensive line coach, Todd Bowles there at the same time as the secondary coach. So those two kind of worked hand in hand, secondary and defensive line. So they know each other. He knows what Casey Rogers is about. And so Casey Rogers getting his first opportunity to be a defensive coordinator in this league. You see where these connections always work out. I talk about the NFL just being one big networking system when you talk about coaches and general managers. It's one big circle. Who do you know determines how you will be perceived and how you will end up getting work in this league, which is just like most lines of work and in most fields of work. You will find that it's not what you know, it's who you know. And it doesn't change here in the National Football League. Look at the offensive coordinator. And speaking of offense, I talked about the offense and why I still have my doubts about, what this Jets football team will be able to do. You still need talent, and you're hoping that Mike Maccagnan will help you solve some of those issues with him drafting right players, going into free agency, bringing in some guys that can help. You have some solid football players. Don't get it twisted. I don't want you to think that I believe that there's not enough talented football players. Your running back situation is pretty solid. I like the fact that Jason Morrow is a young tight end. I'd love to see him catch the football more. He had a lot of drops in his rookie season. You still have Jeff Cumberland behind him, so I think he's a solid tight end as well. Then you've got Eric Decker on the outside. I like Jeremy Curley. There are some pieces here to work with. You just need a lot more talent. You need guys that can win one-on-one matchups. You need to have more difference makers. And of course, the big elephant in the room, the quarterback position. Is it Geno Smith? Is it somebody else? I think we all feel like it's going to be someone else. But until then, it's Geno Smith. But Chan Gailey has been the one that has been crowned with the, to me, burden of getting this Jets offense off the ground. And you look at Chan Gailey, you look at his body of work, whether he's at Georgia Tech in the college ranks or he's here in the NFL, head coach of the Cowboys, head coach with the Dolphins at one point. He's done a number of stints as coordinators around the league. With Chan Gailey, he's a guy that, or excuse me, not with Miami, head coaching gig with the Buffalo Bills. He was a coordinator in Miami. You look at Chan Gailey, and to me, I look at this hire and I say, Chan Gailey is an offensive mind. We know that Chan Gailey has been around the block in the National Football League. He's done numerous things. He's worked with a lot of successful offenses, and I like Chan Gailey. I don't love Chan Gailey, but I will say this. He's had a lot of success in this league. I don't know if the NFL has somewhat passed him by or not. I don't know. There was a disconnect for me with Chan Gailey in Buffalo. I just didn't like what I saw from him in Buffalo when he was their head coach. And so I have my doubts, but he was a head coach then. Maybe when you pull back some of the responsibilities and what he has to do and just focus him on just getting the offense intact and not having to worry about anything else, special teams and defense and all of that stuff, just worrying about the offense, maybe he will work out a lot better in New York with that role. So we'll see how that works out for Todd Bowles and this Jets football team having Chan Gailey be their offensive coordinator. A couple of other notable hires. Special teams coordinator Bobby April Jr. comes in from Oakland. I thought he was okay in Oakland, not great. So we'll see if he can have this Jets special teams unit maybe do some big things, because again, you got to win 2/3 of the football game. If you're going to win any given game, you need to win at least 2 out of the 3 facets of the game. Defense, offense, special teams are your 3 facets. You're not going to win offense and defense every week. Sometimes special teams are going to have to step in there and help you out. You hope that a guy like Bobby April Jr. can come in and get this special teams unit and get them to perform at a very high level for you in 2015 and moving forward. And defensive line coach Pepper Johnson is going to be taking the reins there. Pepper Johnson comes over from Buffalo, where he was the defensive line coach. He was hoping to get the New York Giants defensive coordinator job. Remember, he spent the bulk of his playing career in New York as a linebacker. He didn't get that job, was passed over for Steve Spagnuolo. So now he's back on the block and he gets an opportunity to come back to the Jets as their defensive line coach. Has spent about 10 to 12 to maybe even 14 years under the watchful eye of Bill Belichick in New England as their defensive line coach before moving on to Buffalo last year and now to New York with the Jets this year. So that's what the Jets coaching search and their whole sort of offseason thus far looks like. They've made a couple more personnel moves, but you look at the Jets right now, the one thing that I've seen with them over the last month or so and what they've done and what they've collected is that they're going with a different approach. They're looking to have football guys in there. Not to say that Rex Ryan wasn't a football guy. I don't think that John Idzik was what they thought he was going to be. But one thing's for sure, Mike Maccagnan is definitely a football junkie. And Todd Bowles has put in his work. He's been a player in this league. He's now getting a chance to be a full-time head coach. He's been around the block numerous times. He's going to continue the pressure in New York with this defense. My question is, and always has been, where is the offense going to come from in New York? But we will see. That's going to do it for the Jets and their coaching situation. They've got a new general manager, new head coach, new offensive and defensive coordinator. Now they're going to start going through the motions in the process of trying to figure out what they're going to do in free agency and then take a draft. And so we'll see what happens and what comes of this situation with the Jets in the offseason. If it happens in the National Football League, whether big or small, we cover it all here in the lab. Back and join me as I continue to break down all of the coaching searches in the National Football League. See you in a bit as the coaching search series rolls on.